Welcome back to This is VANCOLOUR. We're told that Canada needs high immigration due to our current labor shortage. Of course, I don't have to tell you that throughout the province, the country even, our communities need more healthcare workers, more educators, and more people to build all the housing that we're desperate for. But is our current immigration strategy filling in the gaps of our labor market? Here to discuss is the former Principal Secretary to Premier Christy Clark and the current President of the Independent Contractors and Business Association of British Columbia. He is Chris Gardner, and this conversation is supported by Shelter Point Single Malt Whiskey, distinctly Vancouver Island, uniquely Shelter Point. So Chris, as someone who represents several different industries, just how bad is the labor shortage in British Columbia or in Canada as a whole?
Well, you know, this issue has been one that is felt across our economy. We've been there's been a lot of conversation about this for the last 5 years, close to a decade. And in construction, we're feeling that acutely. And it's been the number one issue for our members and construction contractors across the country for many, many years. And just to put that in perspective, how bad it's been, if you look at the start of last year, we had about 80,000 construction job vacancies across the country.
80,000 vacancies across Canada.
Across Canada. So in British Columbia, we probably have about 15% of those, just given our proportion of the population and the economy. And so that is a significant gap in skills that contractors require to perform all the work, to build the roads, the bridges, the houses, and the infrastructure we need to support our economy and our communities. And then if you look at what's happening in terms of the structure of the workforce, about 20% of construction workers are 55 or older.
Really?
And
okay.
construction workers retire earlier than the general population, usually around 60.
Yeah.
So we're going over a demographic cliff. And there's this huge gap of job vacancies. Now, as we went through 2023, there was a little bit of an easing up in terms of the job openings, but there's still a gap. There are still contractors. We just released a survey today, and it's still 87% of our members, and we have 4,500 members and clients across Western Canada, are saying that they are going to be busier or as busy in the last year. So very robust, very resilient part of our economy. And the number one issue remains the shortage of workers. So then if you think about what's happening in terms of let's just look at British Columbia.
Yeah.
In 2022, for the first time in the history of this province, more people died than were born. And that trend continued last year. So absent immigration, we have a declining population in British Columbia.
Sure. Low fertility rate. Yeah,
that's right.
Absolutely.
So there's two ways through this. One is technology innovation, being more productive, doing things in a more innovative way. That's not a short.
We can't just 3D print roads?
We can't, not yet. But that is part of the solution.
Sure.
The other part is immigration.
Yeah.
And
so you must be thrilled, right? Because we have record immigration in Canada. So clearly we must be meeting these vacancies.
Well, no. And here's the problem we have with what's happening in immigration right now.
Yeah.
And there probably in the last, 6 months, there's been more written on immigration and what's happening in Canada than probably any other issue. Like every time you open up a paper, a publication, or go online, there's an article about immigration. So here's what's happening. Roughly right now, we are on pace to increase our population, and we did this in the last 12 months, by about 1.3 million people. That is a historic rate of population increase. We haven't seen that since just after World War II. And in fact, the third quarter of last year was the greatest population increase in Canada since 1867.
Wow.
So the floodgates are open.
And so that increase includes temporary foreign workers and international students as well, right? It's not just permanent residents or like immigrants.
So it's probably 1/3 permanent immigrants, about 450,000.
Okay.
And then the rest of the 1.23 million will be temporary foreign workers, international students, and refugees.
Okay.
And so when you look at that population increase in Canada on an annual basis, about 1.3 million, it's about 98% because of immigration. So let's just look at the 450,000 permanent immigrants who came to Canada last year. Only 2%, or 9,000, are going to pursue a career in the construction trades.
Okay.
So, at the beginning of the year, we had a demand for 80,000 jobs, and new immigrants are taking up about 9,000 of them. So the challenge is we are failing miserably on identifying the skills gaps in our economy and then going out and recruiting the people with the skills to fill those gaps.
Right.
We have failed at that. We're failing at that. And then when you combine that failure with and adding basically what we're doing, right now we're on pace to add a city the size of Calgary every year to Canada.
Wow.
So think of that in terms of the pressure on healthcare, on education, on infrastructure, roads, bridges, and on a whole bunch of other social service systems that make our communities function.
So what can we do? Like, what can the federal government do to ensure that folks that are coming are indeed filling in the job vacancies that we need, whether it's in healthcare or in construction or education or wherever else?
Well, just on the trades, I would say it's like, let's just look at it from a very simple math perspective. Construction makes up about 10% of Canada and BC's economy.
Sure.
So why don't we say that we're going to take 10% of the 450,000 permanent immigrants, that 10% of them should have a background or willingness to pursue a career in the trades. So if you did that, that's 45,000 workers, not 9,000 workers.
Right.
So we do something as simple as that, and we don't. And the reason why we don't is, I think, a couple of things. One is, I think there's a little bit of a bias toward the four-year university degree versus someone who's got construction or trades experience. And we see that in our own education systems in high schools here in Canada and British Columbia. If a young person says to a high school counselor, I want to start my own business, that counselor 9 times out of 10 is going to say, go to UBC, go to SFU and study business.
Right.
They're not going to say, go to a trades or technical school, learn a skill, learn a trade, get some experience, and become a contractor. Start your own business, because when you drive by a construction site and you see all those signs hanging there, they are names, more often than not, they are names of people, families, partners who've taken risks, started a business.
Sure.
And come from working on the tools. We don't tell that story. If you're interested in technology, there's more technology now being deployed in how we design and build buildings than ever before. Construction is a technology story. We don't tell that to young people.
We just have about a minute remaining, so I want to ask you this. Fair enough, we can try to attract people that have backgrounds in certain trades or certain professions. How do we ensure that they actually work in those professions? Because once they're here, maybe they go into another field, right? So how do we ensure that they do work in the trades or construction?
Well, I think there's ways to say that for, a certain period of time. You can't shackle someone to a vocation for the rest of their lives.
Sure.
But you can say for, a 2-year period, you've got to work in the construction trades or in this field, fairly broadly defined. There's 19 construction trades. There's a lot of opportunity. And if you're not interested in working on the tools, there's jobs in head offices and marketing and project management and things like that. So I think there's ways we can do that. Right now, we're doing nothing. And that's why we have only 2% of new permanent immigrants pursuing a career in the trades.
Yeah.
Like, the system is failing.
Yeah, clearly.
So we've got to do a better job. We have to do a better job.
Sounds like we just have to do something, or at least try.
That would be good. That would be a start.
Chris, I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Folks, he is the president of the Independent Contractors and Business Association of British Columbia. He is Chris Gardner. Thank you to Shelter Point Single Malt Whiskey for supporting local conversations, especially when they involve complaining about our federal government. Now, after some business, you might be wondering how we've gone an entire episode about immigration without talking to, an immigrant. Well, I'm an immigrant, and I'm going to take a moment up next.